In a world where everyone is told to work hard and wait your turn, very few ever question why the rich never seem to wait at all. Today, we dive into one of the most brutally honest truths about wealth: how the smart get rich quickly, inspired by the cunning mind of Niccolò Machiavelli. If Machiavelli lived today, he wouldn't be lecturing kings, he'd be studying CEOs, parents, students, and workers. He'd see that modern power isn't about morality, it's about understanding human behavior and mastering systems. This video will expose the strategies the modern Machiavellian mind would use, not centuries ago, but right now, in your workplace, your family, your school, and even your daily relationships. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like, and share this video so more people can learn the real, unfiltered truth about power, money, and human behavior, the kind of truth most people aren't ready to hear. If Machiavelli woke up in the world of push notifications and influencer metrics, the first thing he'd teach a parent is that children are small markets. They respond predictably to incentives, attention, and perceived power. In a household argument over chores, he wouldn't wag a finger about fairness, he'd observe who controls the narrative. He would advise the parent who wants compliance to frame rules not as punishments but as prestige upgrades. When you handle your laundry, you gain the privileges of later screen time and trust, rather than do it because I said so. He'd be blunt about consistency. Nothing destroys authority faster than a parent who negotiates differently from day to day, and would design small, repeatable rituals that make obedience automatic. He'd also teach parents to use public reputation as leverage, praise a child in front of siblings for a desired behavior to make that behavior socially valuable inside the family. Machiavelli's cold calculation here is simple: build systems that reduce debate and convert values into predictable outcomes. The modern parent who treats influence like a product sells desirable behavior and gets the return: fewer fights, smoother mornings, and more time to do profitable things. When siblings brawl over inheritance of attention or toys, Machiavelli's instinct would be to manage alliances rather than crush dissent. He'd tell a parent to never show absolute truth publicly, keep confidences so each child believes they have unique standing. In a situation where two kids argue about who gets what privilege, he'd counsel creating a staged negotiation where concessions are visible and earned. By letting one child win in exchange for helping the other with homework, he'd cement a reciprocal economy of favors. He'd also use selective rewards, make the rare, valuable reward contingent on behaviors you want to standardize: punctuality, respect, responsibility, and then raise the bar so children learn to internalize standards rather than chase constant external validation. This is manipulative, yes, and Machiavelli would own that word, but in his equation, the stability of the household and the long-term educational outcomes justify strategic short-term deception. In the middle of the night panic when a teenager gets a bad grade, Machiavelli would treat the crisis as a play for long-term leverage, not mere punishment. He'd advise the parent to first contain the emotional fallout, mark down the drama so the teen doesn't weaponize guilt, and then to convert anxiety into targeted action: arrange a small, achievable tutoring contract, set immediate measurable goals, and publicly assign a mentor role to the teen in some area they already excel at: sports, coding, music. That restores status while fixing the immediate problem. He'd insist on clear consequences for repeated patterns, not because punishment is his point, but because predictability produces control. The payoff is simple: the child learns the language of measurable improvement, the parent reestablishes authority without humiliation, and the family's resources are invested where they truly yield returns. When a parent suspects another adult in the house is undermining their authority, a new partner, a grandparent, a cousin, Machiavelli would not confront but calmly counsel. He'd map the new allies' incentives and either co-opt them with a small but meaningful benefit or neutralize them by creating a diffuse authority that's harder to challenge. For instance, He'd suggest institutionalizing certain family rituals that lock in the parents' preferences: bedtime, budget meeting, meal planning, making the parent the architect rather than the enforcer. If co-option fails, he'd be ruthless in public and private distinction, publicly maintain civility and unity to avoid fracturing the family's reputation. Privately, cut the other adult's influence by reassigning decision rights subtly: "I'll handle school stuff, you take holidays." He'd accept short-term discomfort to preserve long-term control, because control equals predictability and predictability creates opportunities, both emotional and material, later. In school, Machiavelli would view educational prowess as fungible capital. Credentials, reputation, and networks are convertible into higher-paying opportunities. If a student is competing for limited scholarships, Machiavelli's playbook is to identify where selection committees are emotionally biased and present the applicant who fits that bias with surgical precision. He'd coach students to curate their image, a balanced profile of competence, leadership, and a narrative that fills the committee's unconsciously desired archetype. In group assignments, he'd advise taking visible roles that accrue credit but require minimal extra work: presenting the final slide, coordinating meetings, or being the one who communicates with the professor. That ensures credit sticks even when effort is distributed. For parents of students, he'd recommend investing not always in raw tutoring hours, but in targeted signal-boosting activities. A strategically chosen extracurricular or a mentor with influence can amplify a child's marketability more than extra practice problems. When a teacher publicly criticizes a child, Machiavelli would see the classroom as a stage where reputation is created or destroyed. He would counsel the parent or student to control the message in real time, respond with composed evidence of the student's abilities, a portfolio, prior grades, testimonials, rather than emotional rebuttal. And then redirect the teacher's narrative by inviting collaboration: "Can you advise how my child can meet this standard?" Which transforms criticism into an opportunity for perceived growth. He'd also teach kids to manage peer perception. When someone is labeled smart or slacker, that label follows them. The pragmatic move is to create moments where the label flips in front of the group, present a smart solution in a casual setting, or perform consistently in a public task so the new label sticks. Machiavelli would emphasize that perception is often the shortest path to resource allocation. Scholarships, tutoring offers, or leadership roles follow reputations more than raw talent. In workplace politics, Machiavelli would liken promotions to court appointments. Influence trumps diligence when visibility and sponsorship matter. Faced with a performance review where politics matter, he wouldn't advise slavish labor. He'd advise mapping formal and informal power structures, finding the managers with hiring/promotion clout, and building a tailored alliance. Make small, high-visibility wins in projects those gatekeepers monitor. Volunteer for deliverables that position you in front of decision-makers. He'd be blunt about reciprocity: favor strategically, and track those favors so you can call them in for sponsorship when needed. In a toxic team environment where coworkers undermine one another, Machiavelli would recommend being the center that doesn't burn bridges. Present yourself as indispensable by owning niche knowledge and creating dependencies that ease people's lives while making you the obvious choice for advancement. When your boss is a micromanager who steals credit, Machiavelli would not counsel quitting or moralizing. He'd counsel relocating the credit economy. Create visible artifacts, emails, slide decks, demos, that document your contribution before the meeting. And frame your updates as collaborative wins with subtle emphasis on your role. He'd recommend cultivating allies who can vouch for you publicly, because independent testimonials neutralize the boss who hoards praise. If the boss is dangerously insecure, Machiavelli would advise flattering their ego in ways that tie their success to yours. Give them a path to present your work as their idea. This decreases resistance while maintaining progress. He'd call this political hygiene. You accept small indignities to preserve influence and keep the pipeline to rewards open. In a workplace layoff threat, Machiavelli would treat survival as a triage problem: secure your indispensability, document outcomes, and construct exit options. He'd tell you to quickly generate short-term wins that are easily attributable, to present those wins in forums your boss can't ignore, and to quietly network outside the company before any announcement. He'd say the smart don't ask permission for security, they create it by being the person whose removal would cause immediate measurable pain. If that's impossible, he'd advise negotiating an exit package proactively by leveraging positive relationships and packaging departure as mutually beneficial. In every moment, the goal is to convert vulnerability into transactionable value, documented results. Testimonials and alternatives. When negotiating a business deal, Machiavelli would enter with a dual mindset: game theory patience and staged generosity. In a contract negotiation where price is fixed but terms are flexible, he'd give small, symbolic concessions early that cost little but reset the opponent's expectation of win: a free month of service, a minor warranty extension, while holding back on the items that produce real profit erosion. He'd structure deals in phased milestones so your counterparty is committed step by step and less inclined to bail when friction appears. He'd also control information, reveal only the data necessary to make you look scarce and competent, not desperate. If your counterpart tries to conquer the negotiation with threats, Machiavelli's modern play would be to turn threats into options, reveal the competitive alternatives you quietly cultivated and invite them to match, not dictate, terms. When a startup founder faces investor pressure to sell early, Machiavelli would treat the term sheet as a negotiation over future narratives, not just numbers. He'd guard optionality, accept capital that expands runway without ceding control, or if forced into terms, attach performance milestones that protect founder decisions. He'd be cold about ego, don't sell identity for liquidity, but pragmatic about timing. If investors push for a quick exit that lowers long-term value, he'd quietly explore alternate paths, strategic partnerships, licensing deals, or revenue pivots that make the company valuable without a sale. He'd favor structures that let you profit today while retaining avenues for larger gains tomorrow. Because the truly rich preserve upside and avoid being boxed into a premature bargain, when a partner in business flatters you publicly but undercuts you privately, Machiavelli would recommend a dual-track response: preserve the public face but reorganize real power behind the scenes. He'd advise creating formal contracts that capture the goodwill shown publicly, and to build contingencies, escrow, arbitration clauses, staged royalties, that fire if the partner acts bad faith. Simultaneously, cultivate alternative partners and suppliers so that any betrayal becomes a replaceable hiccup. Machiavelli would be blunt: public theater is often where reputation is won, but private safeguards are where wealth is secured. If pushed to choose between pride and protection, pick protection. In family financial disputes over budgets, Machiavelli would treat the household like a small corporation where clarity of incentives matters more than fairness rhetoric. If a spouse constantly overspends, he'd craft a structure where discretionary items have defined budgets or approval processes, and where financial milestones unlock privileges, vacation, investments, new tech. He'd also use signal economics, link large purchases to documented contributions or to joint goal progress so every expense becomes a vote for the shared future rather than a unilateral demand. He'd be cold about blaming and focused on mechanisms because mechanisms create predictable resource allocation and reduce the emotional volatility that destroys savings and opportunity. When negotiating a salary raise, Machiavelli would tell you to present a packet, not please. He'd gather documented results, a market benchmark, and a clear alternative timeline. If you don't get X wage now, here are the measurable targets and a date when you will renegotiate or leave. He'd frame the ask as a win for the company, explain how higher compensation ties to retention risk, training costs avoided, or the revenue you directly influence. He'd be ruthless about timing, make the ask after a success, not during a slump, because timing converts requests into logical, unavoidable steps rather than favors. He'd also quietly line up other offers to strengthen your hand. Not to threaten but to shift perception of scarcity. When a child refuses to do homework because it's boring, Machiavelli would suggest converting the assignment into a status contest rather than laborious punishment. He'd design challenges where the child's output is showcased, a family mini-expo of projects, or sending top work to a teacher with a visible parent note, making effort socially valuable. He'd accept strategic bribes for short-term compliance if they seed longer-term habits, a small reward for a completed streak that then converts into intrinsic pride through public recognition. He'd approach education as signaling. The child who learns to perform for audiences will attract the teachers, scholarships, and mentors that convert into adult opportunities. When parents argue about discipline style in front of children, Machiavelli would be adamant about appearing united even if you disagree privately. He'd recommend a staged unity where public messages are consistent, decisions are presented as joint and definitive, while private channels keep the debate alive to refine strategy. He'd consider the child's perception the operative reality. Uncertainty and public contradiction breed manipulation attempts and erode authority. So he'd counsel private negotiation where the adult with the final say is the one with the better long-term credibility, not necessarily the louder voice. He'd choose cohesion over moral high ground because the stable household creates fewer crises and preserves resources. In educational choices, whether to push for advanced classes or a vocational track, Machiavelli would recommend choosing the path that optimizes future leverage rather than immediate prestige. He'd tell parents to ask, which route produces convertible assets, credentials, relationships, demonstrable skills, in the marketplace my child will enter. If advanced classes produce prestige but no network, and a vocational track produces cash flow and marketable skills, he'd prefer the latter if it maximizes optionality. He'd also be pragmatic about switching. Don't brand the child forever, build a portfolio of skills that can pivot. His preference is not purity of education but the convertible value education yields in a world where opportunities are traded like assets. If a teacher or school administrator tries to gatekeep opportunities, selecting certain students for competitions or recommendations, Machiavelli would advocate for institution-level influence rather than personal pleading. He'd counsel parents to get involved in the parent board, volunteer for committees, or fund small programs that make their child's value visible. He'd also teach the art of reciprocity, offer help that meets the administrator's pain points, then ask for the favor in return. This is transactional, but in Machiavellian logic, institutional alignment beats emotional appeals every time because it changes the structural incentives that govern choices. In a team startup where co-founders fight, Machiavelli's primary move would be to formalize failure and success pathways, vesting schedules, clear equity splits, exit clauses. He'd avoid letting personality determine ownership. If a co-founder is destructive, he'd either buy them out when weak or dilute them through formal performance metrics, make equity tied to milestones. He'd also be strategic about public perception, keep the brand above internal conflict while fixing the governance problem privately. His approach is dense with legal and social leverage because money flows where ownership is clear and where public confidence is undisturbed, when encountering a competitor who undercuts you on price. Machiavelli would not match prices blindly. He'd redefine the market segment to emphasize scarcity, reliability, or bundled value that the competitor can't replicate without hurting their margins. He'd also invest in narrative, make your brand the safer, smarter, or premium choice in customers' minds so that price becomes secondary. If necessary, he'd engage in selective price fights where the goal is to exhaust a competitor's ability to sustain losses, but only when you have a deeper reserve. He'd be ruthless with resources, never commit to a war of attrition without calculating your burn rate advantage. In a family business where a relative expects undeserved shares, Machiavelli would recommend formal governance, bylaws, a board, and transparent performance metrics. He'd avoid letting sentiment dictate equity. If a relative insists on more control, he'd either negotiate a title without vote, a consultancy fee, or create a buy-in mechanism that requires the relative to prove value. He'd be blunt: family ties are valuable, but conflating them with ownership is a fast path to collapse. Protect the company's structure first, charity can come later if the business survives. When a parent wants to teach money to kids, Machiavelli would recommend turning allowances into investments, give a small capital and require children to allocate it between saving, spending, and investing in a family market where simple appliances or chores yield returns. Teach them that money grows with systematized choices, not luck. He'd emphasize that compounding behaviors, consistent saving, reputation for reliability, and the ability to negotiate trades, are the real wealth drivers. This is practical and merciless. Kids who learn agency over small capital develop the risk instincts that compound into real financial opportunities. When closing a business deal that depends on trust, Machiavelli would still install contractual guardrails. He'd accept the importance of trust as a lubricant for deals but distrust it as an asset to rely on without backup. Use escrow, staged payments, independent verifiers, and reputation clauses so that trust can be enforced externally. If the counterpart is novel and promising, he'd propose trial projects that convert trust into track record before full commitment. In his view, smart people treat trust like a short-term credit line, extend it carefully, monitor repayment, and never let it become the sole basis of a high-stakes transaction. When a family member leverages emotional blackmail to access resources, "If you loved me you'd let me borrow the money," Machiavelli would teach the target to separate emotion and ledger. He'd recommend structured aid, small, documented loans with clear repayment terms, or non-refundable gifts that cap exposure. Publicly, maintain a compassionate tone; privately, enforce terms. By professionalizing family assistance, you both limit exploitation and create a precedent that future requests must meet. Machiavelli would argue that the dignity of being generous is retained only if generosity is sustainable. Unsustainable charity is a tax on future opportunity. Finally, in every modern scenario, parenting, school, office, or boardroom, Machiavelli's core principle would be to convert human behavior into predictable systems and then own those systems. He'd build incentives, manage narratives, institutionalize consequences, and always protect optionality. He'd be ruthless about separating pride from profit, sacrifice ego today for structured growth tomorrow. The modern smart get rich quickly not because they are cold monsters but because they design environments where predictable leverage, reputation economics, and convertible actions funnel resources to them. Machiavelli's cold advice, translated to today's world, is simply this: don't depend on goodwill. Design it, own it, and make it transact. The truth is simple: the world doesn't reward the hardest worker, it rewards the most strategic one. Machiavelli, living in today's age of algorithms and politics, would have played the game better than anyone else. He'd know when to flatter, when to fight, and when to let others destroy themselves. Wealth today isn't built on fairness, it's built on precision, perception, and timing. Whether it's parenting, school, the workplace, or business, those who understand how people truly operate control the outcomes. So, if this breakdown opened your eyes, if you saw pieces of yourself, your boss, or your own family in these truths, don't just leave it here. Subscribe to the channel for more brutally honest lessons from history's sharpest minds. Like this video to support the message, and share it with someone who still believes being nice is the way to win. The world has changed, it's time to learn how to play it the Machiavellian way.